I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, some suggestion that President Obama is hoping to take action on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict before he leaves the Oval Office next month. That suggestion came from outgoing Secretary of State John Kerry, who said in a Washington speech there are things the administration can do to preserve a two-state solution. Well, many people who care about Israel and believe that the only way for there ever to be a successful resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is through direct bilateral negotiations have expressed concern the president might do something drastic regarding the creation of a Palestinian state at the United Nations, and then trying to strong-arm Israel into accepting a diplomatic fait accompli. In fact, you heard Alan Dershowitz on JBS express that very concern. Well, how significant is the Kerry suggestion? For some insight, I'm pleased to be joined once again by Ron Kampeas, the Washington Bureau Chief of the JTA, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. Ron, it's good to have you on again. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Ron, you wrote an excellent piece entitled John Kerry Signals White House Mulling Lame Duck Push for Mideast Peace. What's the essence of your article?
Well, in a speech he gave, the Obama administration, the officials are sort of doing their round of farewells, and he spoke at Women's Foreign Policy Forum, I think, last week, and he said that there still might be. They said there's things that still can be done to preserve the two-state option. And then yesterday at the Saban Forum, the annual convocation of Israeli and American influencers convened by Chaim Saban, who is an Israeli-American entertainment billionaire, John Kerry was asked point blank about whether he could support a solution imposed by the UN. And the way he answered was not if it's one-sided and if it's unfair and it's biased. Of course, that left a lot of room because the Israelis obviously don't want a biased resolution against them, but they don't want any resolution coming through the UN. Like you said, they prefer to resolve this bilaterally with the Palestinians. What the Palestinians do prefer some kind of outside intervention because they feel that the scales aren't balanced. When they're meeting Israel one-on-one, it's a state actor versus a non-state actor. It's an actor with an army versus an actor with a police force. They feel at a disadvantage. That's one of the reasons why they want outside intervention. In any case, that sort of has fueled the speculation. But I have to say that if you look at the stuff that Barack Obama has said and done, and this is the thing this is a trick in covering Israel from the United States. You have to consider the personalities not just within the sphere of what might or might not happen with Israel. Consider the broader personalities. And I say this because my impression, just watching him and the things he said, for instance, in his meeting in September with Netanyahu, Obama does not want to push this now. He wants to be a lame duck president in every sense of the word. Mm-hmm. He's a constitutionalist. It's up to the next president. That's the impression. That's AP has got people inside the White House to say exactly that. He does not favor some kind of dramatic move right now. And if you look at his whole term in office, the whole thing that defines Obama is reluctance. And suddenly in the last 50 days in office, he's going to do something dramatic like back statehood recognition at the UN. It just doesn't sound plausible. And so what I've heard is that maybe he's considering something lower key, like the kind of speech that Clinton gave in the last days of his administration. I don't know if you remember, in early 2001, he spoke to the Israel Policy Forum and he laid out what are called the Clinton parameters.
Yes.
Might do something like that.
Yes.
I'm putting my bet on the very doubtful in terms of a UN move.
Okay. By the way, you saw that former President Carter, had a piece in the New York Times, an op-ed piece, in which he was really urging the president not to veto a UN security resolution that would create a Palestinian state. And the question was bandied about, would President Obama follow Jimmy Carter's suggestion? What's your sense of the relationship between Obama and Carter, and would Obama ever listen to Carter on this type of issue?
I don't think so. He hasn't consulted much with him. They've done the the 5 living presidents type thing, and I don't. He hasn't visited the White House. There hasn't been much consultation between Obama and Carter. Certainly, Carter's descendants, his grandson, they've been very avid fans of Obama, but I don't think he's taking advice from him particularly, and certainly not on the Middle East. Look, there's a push. There's definitely a push from the, let's call them the Middle Eastern left, the Doves, for Obama to do something in his last days in office. You can see, and I think that push from within the administration is coming from Kerry because of the things that we talked about that he said.
Yes.
But it doesn't strike me that Obama is very receptive to it. He doesn't. Yeah, and again, looking at the bigger picture, he wants as smooth a transition as possible, in part because he wants to influence Donald Trump, president-elect. Why would he do something that would, anger him?
I want to spend one more moment on Kerry, because it's very interesting the way you say it. It's almost as if this matters more to Kerry at the moment than it does to President Obama. You write that Kerry said everybody knows which risks Palestinians and Israelis must be prepared to take for peace. Ron, this statement always drives me crazy. I want you to comment on this. What risks does Kerry think Israel must be prepared to take for peace?
I suppose, he's referring, and he actually expanded on this yesterday at the Saban Forum. He's referring to the lack of security that comes with ceding strategic territory in the Jordan Valley and the West Bank. And he talked about how I hadn't been aware. He threw out some numbers I'd not been aware of. He talked about how the team that he had working on ensuring that Israel could have compensation for that security through advanced technology. It was 150 people. It was headed up by John Allen, the general, if you remember. It turns out that there were 150 people, at least according to Kerry, on that team. Some other things he said is that officially, like in the kinds of calls, the phone calls that you put down that somebody sits next to you and writes down on a log, officially he spoke to Bibi Netanyahu over the last 4 years, 130 hours, and unofficially even more, but officially they spoke 130 hours. Who knew? But so that's what he's talking about, the risks that are involved in giving up territory, and he said that he tried to address those risks with the plans that John Allen brought into play, but the Israeli security establishment was just not impressed with those plans.
Okay. So on the one hand, Kerry is saying the risks that Israel must be willing to take relate to security. What are the risks the Palestinians have to take?
The risks that Palestinians have to take are the risks to their lives, I suppose. The Palestinian leadership, because of the threat that they would face of betraying the Palestinian cause by settling for a deal that doesn't have absolute control over Jerusalem, that shares the land. I suppose that's what he's referring to. It's not an untrue risk. It's what I think ultimately inhibited Yasser Arafat from taking up the far-reaching offers that Ehud Barak put on the table in 2000 during the Camp David talks. Arafat feared for his life.
Okay. You understand there's a different quality, a different nature in those risks. One risk affects the Israeli people. I assumed that Kerry meant there were risks that the Palestinian people have to be willing to make. What you're saying is that there is so much enmity inside the Palestinian community for a peace with Israel that the risk that is one that will be the risk that they must take is not a risk that the people have to take. It's the risk that the leadership, that Anwar Sadat ultimately pays for with his life by making peace between Egypt and Israel. It's not normally, I think, what people think anybody means when they say both sides must be willing to give up something and must be willing to risk. It's interesting for me to hear you say, Kerry thinks the risk for the Israeli people is security. The risk for the Palestinians are Mahmoud Abbas has to worry about being assassinated. Do I have it correct?
I think so. I mean, yes, and there are obviously, absolutely. If the Palestinians get their state, there are no further risks. The Israelis, are going to withdraw. They're not going to invade. Maybe they think that they're going to invade, but I don't think that's objectively something that John Kerry could advance, because once it's done, it's done. We've seen that in Israel. They withdrew from Lebanon. They didn't go back in. They withdrew from Gaza. They didn't go back in.
Right.
I think, there is obviously an attendant, if there's an assassination, if things devolve into chaos, there's an attendant risk for the Palestinian people as well. But again, that's not a risk that comes from Israel. That's a risk that comes from within, from their own extremists.
Okay. To the best of your knowledge, Ron, has the president or has Secretary Kerry ever said to the Palestinians that it is unacceptable for them to take the position that Jews will be forbidden to live in their Palestinian state?
I'm not sure. I do know that they've certainly raised the issue of incitement. The issue, it has come up. I think the Mahan Arakat, the ambassador here, the PLO envoy here, has said point blank. He said it a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago, that Jews should not be able, at least initially, to live in the Palestinian state. So there is that. That's something that I don't know if the administration or any American official addressed at that time. But that's qualitatively different than the issue that comes up, which is whether the settlements can stay and be administered in the way that they've been administered, because that's something that would be left up to negotiation in terms of the natural resources that the settlements use. I mean, that's the kind of thing that the administration addresses when it goes to the perceived inequity between the lives of the settlers and the lives of the Palestinians in terms of access to roads, resources, etc.
Look, you and I are both in the world of Jewish journalism, and we may have our personal feelings on any matter. I am just saying to you that as someone who has been reporting on this now for years, it always surprises me that there are people in the administration, and by the way, in the Jewish community as well, who are very supportive of the Palestinians, and yet in no other circumstance would they ever say that a piece of territory would be Rhine of any kind, Judenrein or other Rhine. And I'm surprised that more of an issue is not made of this. And again, as somebody who has been on the Washington scene now for years and years, does it surprise you? And is there any explanation you have for why this isn't made an issue? Why we don't hear all the time that if the Palestinians want a state, one thing they may not say is that it's going to be Judenrein. Why is that not being said, Ron, all the time?
Well, first of all, it has been said in a certain context. I think, for instance, particularly with the holy sites, with Hebron, when it's gotten into the nitty-gritty, there's been talk of a perpetual Jewish presence in places like Hebron, where there's an obvious cultural, religious, ancient attachment. It hasn't become preeminent. It's not the main focus because with a few exceptions, I mean, and actually the exceptions are very much on the left. People like Amir Haas, the Haaretz columnists. There hasn't been any movement of Jews into the Palestinian areas with a willingness to live as Palestinians per se. There's been some settlers who say, possibly that's something I could contemplate in the long run if that were the part of the final status. But what you've had from the Palestinian perspective is not Jews coming in and saying, let's live as Jews and Palestinians in Palestine, just like we have Jews and Palestinians living in Israel. You've had them coming in and appropriating land and appropriating water and building roads and saying, let's take this land for Israel. And so it's not a natural question that comes up under those circumstances.
Okay, but I want to make sure everybody understands. I've been in, quote, Israeli settlements, the communities. I went to Karnei Shomron with a camera crew. I said to person after person in Karnei Shomron, if the Palestinians said you could live here, but you'd have to live under Palestinian sovereignty, would you be willing to do it? Would you want to do it? The answer was yes. And it's not about appropriating land. It's about whether we have Arab communities, Israeli Arab communities inside the state of Israel. Why can't there be Jewish Palestinian communities inside the new Palestinian state? And again, I'm not asking you to adjudicate it. I'm just saying to you, one of the things that always surprises me is this issue is not made more of. Having said that, coming back to your piece, you also mention that Kerry has been defending the Iran nuclear deal. And
right.
What's going on there? And is there a worry that Donald Trump and his administration might want to do something either to manipulate, change the deal, or even kill it?
There's not so much a worry, but there is a lot of speculation as to what it might do. There are people who are saying, there's even not speculation. There's like a lot of wondering as to whether he can kill the deal outright. In other words, yes, he could. All he has to do is, for instance, the Iran Sanctions Act was extended for another 10 years, and that actually makes things. There were a lot of things that Donald Trump could do to pull U.S. out of the deal, and this actually makes it much easier for him, in the sense that all he has to do now is stop waiving the sanctions, stop writing that letter every 6 months that says I waived the sanctions, which is what, of course, Obama has been doing since the implementation of the deal. So he could do that. The question is, does that really end the deal? Does that really compel the 5 other major powers that signed on to the deal, plus all the countries that agreed to impose sanctions on Iran, to bring it to the table in the first place? Are they going to sort of say, okay, the U.S. is out, we're all out? There's can Iran actually sustain the benefits it's accrued from the deal, even without the United States being part of the deal? That's a whole question. We don't know yet. We have to see how it plays out, and we have to see whether Trump is advised to do that. There's 2 kinds of streams now in terms of people who are very critical of the deal before. You had Benjamin Netanyahu saying, also at the Savan Forum via video link, he wasn't here in Washington, that he basically said that he would want the deal scuttled. He sees it as a very bad deal. He sees it as a deal is leading to a nuclear Iran, enabling a nuclear Iran. And then you have General James Mattis, who is very, very sharp critic of the deal.
Yes.
Left the Obama administration, left CENTCOM in part because he wanted a more tougher posture
yes.
on Iran, but who has also said that, now that the deal is done, you can't go back on it. But what it does need is enforcement. You have to be tougher on making sure Iran doesn't try to skirt around the edges, as it's been accused of doing over the last few months.
Okay. All right, so we mentioned Donald Trump. Speaking of his surprise election, I'm hearing, Ron, very different things from pro-Trump supporters and anti-Trump people in terms of how Israelis feel about Trump's becoming president. I hear that entire communities in Israel supported Trump, and that Americans living in Israel sent in absentee ballots overwhelmingly in favor of Trump. Then I hear that Benjamin Netanyahu is overjoyed. And I hear that there are Israelis who are devastated that Trump won. What do you hear, Ron, about Israeli sentiment vis-a-vis Trump's win?
I think that more Israelis feel that he's pro-Israel than not. They're looking to the fact that he has associations with people like his son-in-law Jared Kushner, who are very pro-Israel, have a very pro-Israel background. His advisors, and that he has been, he wanted to actually meet with Netanyahu before he goes into office. Netanyahu declined because he didn't think that was appropriate. He prefers to wait until he's in office. I think there's an optimism that they can certainly work together. I wouldn't say that Netanyahu is overjoyed, though. I think that when it's, it's prima facie. Look at what he says. He would have been happier with either candidate for different reasons. You can see why in his remarks yesterday, the Saban Forum, why he was happy with Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is going to at least amend or try and address the
Iran deal, right?
Yeah, perceives in the Iran deal. But then you had Avigdor Lieberman, the defense minister, and he was making the case for why Israelis might have been, in a very subtle way, without saying it, of course, why the Israelis might have preferred a Clinton presidency. He said, you need the outcome in Syria has to be the ouster of the Assad regime. It has to be and it has to be the removal of the Iranians. Now, so if you look at the three actors, Obama, Clinton, and Trump, and what their different attitudes are in it, Obama he's wanted the ouster of the Assad regime since 2011, but he's been reluctant to commit the necessary means to do so because he thinks that that's going to get further into a quagmire.
Mm-hmm.
Clinton wants the ouster of the Assad regime, just like Avigdor Lieberman's one. She wanted that. She was more ready to commit more troops on the ground, which is exactly what he said was needed. He said Lieberman said you need a robust U.S. presence. Donald Trump doesn't want the ouster of the Assad regime. He's explicitly said it. That's so if you want to know, like, overjoyed, not overjoyed, I think that they saw good things and bad things coming from either outcome, whether Clinton or Trump won the presidency.
Okay. There was a piece written in the New York Times about Naftali Bennett's response, which was, now that Trump has been elected president, all limitations on settlement building, especially settlement building in Jerusalem. And I'm not saying building in Jerusalem is settlement building, but that's the way it is often portrayed or described by the administration. And what Bennett was saying was a Trump administration lifts some of that negative comment and negative feeling about what Israel can do, especially in existing settlement blocks and really beyond them as well. What's your sense of the Naftali Bennett comment, and how is that playing out?
I think there was a lot of pushback from Netanyahu on that kind of comment, not just from Naftali Bennett but from others in his government. He's reasonably saying, don't preempt these folks, don't make them mad before it starts. Maybe that's what they'll say. Go ahead, do these things. Maybe that will be their attitude. But if you try and sort of present them with a fait accompli before they even take office, they're going to be mad at you.
Yes.
So that's we'll see what happens. I think that it's premature to try and advance those things during the lame duck, during the transition.
Fair enough.
We'll see what happens after January 1st.
And Ron, what do you hear inside the Jewish community about the Democratic Party considering making the new chair of the DNC Representative Keith Ellison, when Ellison seems to have a lot of baggage, including anti-Israel baggage? What do you hear? Well,
there's a lot of, it's like, there's a whole range of responses, from the right wing to the left wing to the center. There's certainly, yes, the baggage on Israel. He's got certainly a critical view of Israel. And that also depends on where you sit. This is a guy who also goes into American Muslims and says, I believe in in strong relations with Israel, but I'm also critical. He's saying, that's one of the interesting things that came out of this recording of a conversation he had with a group of Muslims in Virginia 6 years ago. He didn't have to say that. He can say that to AIPAC, and he's describing his meetings with AIPAC, but he didn't have to say that. On the other hand, he's embraced criticisms of Israel that certainly within the mainstream and even the liberal pro-Israel community are kind of sort of over the line, like not embracing, but wanting to take the Goldstone report seriously. That's just a non-starter within the within the pro-Israel community. Not voting for the additional Iron Dome funds in 2014.
Yes.
Because he said he preferred a ceasefire. Although why they're mutually exclusive, you could advocate for a ceasefire and advocate for Iron Dome at the same time. But so yes, there's a lot of trepidation about that. But there's also, I mean, Chaim Saban at this forum said he's an anti-Semite. There's like kind of at least on the from the center to the left of the Jewish community, there's kind of a horror at that, because if you talk to the folks he works with in Minneapolis, he is, he's not perceived as anything close to anti-Semitic. I mean, he operates from within his worldview, but from within his worldview, it's complex, it's nuanced. Mark Schneier, the New York rabbi who heads the Foundation for Ethnic Understanding, said that the group, every cycle, every election, has a reception for new members of Congress. And so 2007, Keith Ellison came to the reception, and the first thing he started to do was to lambast the Iranian regime for its Holocaust denial. That was the thrust, and that was the main part of his speech. You have to consider, is somebody like that truly anti-Semitic, and is there value to having somebody like that as a leader within the Muslim community, and should you alienate them by counting them out completely and calling them anti-Semitic? I mean, and the other wrinkle to this is that it's not a foregone conclusion that he's going to be the chairman of the Democratic National Committee. It's interesting. Again, we have to sort of like look at like our narrow sort of pro-Israel, anti-Israel, not this way in Israel, and look at the bigger picture. The most pro-Israel people and the most critical Israel people within the Democratic Committee that I've spoken to, they don't want a congressman. They felt burned by the years that Debbie Wasserman Schultz at DNC, because she couldn't give them enough time. And so that's really the dynamic that's playing out in terms of what's going to happen next month. But the way it's going to be covered in the New York Times and everywhere is that, the Jews were defeated because Keith Ellison was elected, or the Jews won a victory because Keith Ellison wasn't elected. And that's not really the case. And you have to wonder, like, to what degree the people who are calling him an anti-Semite and marginalizing him are taking that into consideration.
Ron, it is always wonderful to talk to you, and I appreciate the nuance and the sensitivity. You do fabulous work. I keep telling that to you. And I am always most grateful when you make time for us here on JBS. You be well, and we will speak again very soon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The thoughts of Ron Kampeas, Washington Bureau Chief of the JTA, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. And again, issues are never as simple as we tend to hear them on mainstream television or even in the New York Times. My thanks as always to our director, Sloan Copeland, production coordinator, Serge Goldberg, JBS's associate director, Dara Golub, editors Dennis Golan and John McDevitt, and to the producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.